My golden child sister gambled away our dad's $150,000 retirement fund, and to save herself, she convinced the entire family that I stole it to fund my startup. They completely disowned me, kicked me out, and threatened me with federal prison. But what she didn't realize was that she left her email logged into my old iPad, giving me a crystal clear digital paper trail of all her crimes. So, I crashed our massive Thanksgiving dinner, dropped 15 black folders of ATM security footage right on the table, and watched the police drag her out in handcuffs while the family watched in horror. Grab a snack, because this nuclear revenge is incredibly satisfying. To truly understand the absolute magnitude of the betrayal that shattered my family, you have to understand the suffocating dynamic I grew up in. I, 29M, have spent my entire existence playing the role of the invisible supporting actor in the grand, theatrical production that is my younger sister, Sarah's, 24F, life. In our household, Sarah wasn't just a daughter, she was the indisputable golden child, a fragile porcelain doll who could do absolutely no wrong. The disparity in how we were raised was so blatant it was almost comical. When I turned 16, my dad handed me a bus pass and told me that if I wanted a car, I had better start flipping burgers. I worked 30 hours a week in high school, paid my way through a state college, and graduated with honors and a mountain of student debt. When Sarah turned 16, a brand new, cherry red convertible with a massive silver bow appeared in our driveway. When she dropped out of her third expensive private university because the professors didn't understand her creative aura, my parents gently comforted her and paid off her leases. Every failure was just a stepping stone, while my successes were treated as the bare minimum expectation. I didn't actively hate her, but the resentment was a slow-burning ember in my chest. I eventually moved out, went low contact, and focused entirely on my own survival. Fast forward to last year. After nearly 5 years of grueling, 80-hour work weeks, surviving on cheap ramen, and sacrificing every ounce of a social life, my dream was finally taking off. I had built a B2B software startup focused on supply chain logistics. I was finally out of the red, and my company was on the verge of signing 2 massive, multi-year contracts that would set me up for life. I was exhausted, but I was proud. I had built an empire from the dirt, completely on my own. Right around the time my company started gaining traction, Sarah suddenly announced her new lifelong passion. After abandoning a brief stint as an influencer, a week-long career as a real estate agent, and a bizarre phase of trying to breed designer dogs, she declared she was opening a high-end, online fashion boutique. She had no business plan, no inventory, and no clue how e-commerce worked. All she had was a Pinterest board and a knack for manipulating our parents. She convinced my father, a man who had worked 35 grueling years at a manufacturing plant, that this was her golden ticket. Blinded by his unwavering devotion to his little girl, my dad made a decision that would ultimately destroy our family. He marched into his bank, withdrew exactly $150,000, which represented his entire liquid retirement savings, and placed it into a newly opened joint business account with Sarah. He told me about it over a brief phone call, proudly declaring that he was finally giving his little girl the head start she deserved. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. I knew it was a disaster waiting to happen, but it wasn't my money, and it wasn't my place. The nightmare officially began on a bleak, rainy Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in my modest office, meticulously reviewing the final clauses of a contract that would secure my startup's future. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioner and the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard. Suddenly, my phone shattered the silence. It was my mother. I smiled, thinking she was calling to check in on my contract negotiations. I answered on the first ring. "Hey Mom, I'm just looking over." I didn't even get to finish the sentence. A piercing, hysterical scream erupted from the speaker. It was a visceral, guttural sound of pure rage and heartbreak. "How could you? How could you do this to your own flesh and blood?" She shrieked, her voice cracking. "Is this how we raised you? To be a thief? A monster? You are dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead to me." My blood ran completely cold. The pen slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the desk. "Mom, what are you talking about? Mom, please, breathe, what happened? Don't you dare play dumb with me, you greedy sociopath." She sobbed violently. Before I could say another word, the line went dead. I sat there paralyzed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. As the screen lit up, a notification caught my eye. It was from the extended family group chat, a chat with over 20 people, including my parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. Sarah had sent a massive block of text just 3 minutes ago. I opened the app, and as I read her words, the entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. The message read, "I am typing this with a broken heart, and I don't know how to even process this betrayal. I went to the bank today to finalize the vendor payments for my boutique, only to find out that our joint account has been completely emptied. My brother, my own flesh and blood, forged my signature and transferred my entire business fund and Dad's $150,000 retirement savings into his startup's corporate accounts. He knew Dad was vulnerable. He knew I trusted him with my login details when I asked him for tech help last month. He destroyed my dream just to fund his selfish company, and he ruined our parents' future. I am so sorry, Mom and Dad. I never should have trusted him." I couldn't breathe. The oxygen was sucked out of the room. This wasn't just a dramatic family lie, it was an accusation of a massive federal crime. She had expertly woven my startup's recent success into her narrative, providing a motive that made her sickening lie perfectly believable to a family that already viewed me as an outsider. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed my car keys, bolted out of my office, and sprinted to my car. I was going to my parents' house, and I was going to rip this lie apart. The drive to my parents' house was a blur of screeching tires, heavy rain, and blind panic. My windshield wipers fought violently against the downpour, matching the frantic, racing thoughts in my head. I kept repeating a desperate mantra to myself: this is a misunderstanding. It's a stupid, easily disprovable lie. I'll just pull up my corporate bank statements on my phone, show them my pristine financial records, and this will all be over. I was so incredibly naive. I still believed that logic and evidence held any weight in a house entirely governed by my sister's emotional manipulation. I didn't bother knocking. I threw the front door open, the heavy wood slamming against the entryway wall. I expected to find a panicked household trying to figure out a bank error. Instead, I walked straight into a meticulously organized firing squad. The living room had been rearranged into a literal kangaroo court. My father stood dead center, his arms crossed over his chest, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. My mother was collapsed on the love seat, clutching a tear-soaked tissue to her face, flanked by my eldest uncle, Richard, who was glaring at me like I was a rabid dog. And then there was Sarah. She was curled up into a tiny, pathetic ball on the oversized recliner, wearing an oversized sweater, her knees pulled to her chest. She was trembling visibly, burying her face in her hands, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance of a traumatized victim. "Dad, Mom, listen to me," I started, holding my hands up in a gesture of surrender, water dripping from my coat onto the hardwood floor. "I don't know what the hell is going on, but I didn't touch a single dime of that money. I can open my banking app right now. I can show you." "Shut your mouth," my father roared. The sheer volume of his voice rattled the picture frames on the walls. He took 3 massive, aggressive strides toward me. "Do not stand in my house and treat me like an idiot. The bank manager called us personally this morning. The account wasn't hacked. The money was drained systematically. They said someone with authorized access, someone who knew the pins and the routing numbers, did this. And that wasn't me." I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Dad, I have my own money. My company just secured seed funding. Why would I steal from you? Have them check the IP addresses. Have them check the wire transfers." That was when Sarah struck. She peeked out from behind her hands, her eyes red and puffy, weaponizing her tears perfectly. "Because you're in tech," she wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. "You told me last month how easy it is to route money through ghost accounts and crypto wallets so the IRS can't trace it. You bragged about it. You knew Dad's passwords because you set up his iPad. Why do you hate me so much? Why couldn't you just let me have one good thing? You lying sociopath." I screamed, taking a step toward her. "I haven't spoken to you in a month. I never said any of that." Before I could take another step, my father closed the distance between us. Crack. The sound of his hand colliding with my jaw echoed through the dead silence of the living room. The sheer force of the slap whipped my head to the side, leaving a burning, stinging imprint on my cheek. I stumbled backward, tasting the metallic tang of blood where my teeth had bitten into the inside of my cheek. I froze, my hand slowly coming up to touch my face. In 29 years, my father had never laid a hand on me. Never. "Don't you ever step toward my daughter again," he hissed, his voice dropping to a lethal, trembling whisper. "You are a parasite. You saw an opportunity to fund your little tech project with my life savings, and you took it. You stole my retirement, and you shattered your sister's future." "Dad," I whispered, the betrayal piercing right through my chest, shattering whatever love I had left for this family. "You can't genuinely believe her over me. Look at my track record. Look at hers." Uncle Richard stepped forward, pointing a thick finger at my chest. "Your track record is that you're a jealous, arrogant prick who couldn't stand seeing your sister finally succeed. You have exactly 6 months to put every single penny back into that account. If it's not there by the 1st of November, we are handing all the account data over to the FBI and the local police. We will see you rot in a federal penitentiary." "Get out of my house," my mother sobbed from the couch, refusing to even look at me. "I have no son." I looked at my father, waiting for a flicker of doubt, a moment of hesitation. There was none. He was looking at a stranger. I turned my gaze to Sarah. For a fraction of a second, as our parents looked away, the crying stopped. She looked me dead in the eyes, and a tiny, cold smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. She had won. I turned around and walked out into the pouring rain, but the nightmare had only just begun. The physical exile from the house was nothing compared to the systematic destruction of my life that followed. Over the next 48 hours, my extended family mobilized like a cult. My phone was flooded with venomous text messages from cousins I hadn't seen in years, calling me a thief, a monster, and a disgrace. They coordinated a mass blocking campaign on every social media platform. But it didn't stop at family drama. My Aunt Susan, a bitter woman with way too much free time, took it upon herself to destroy my livelihood. She scoured my startup's LinkedIn page, finding the press releases announcing my 2 newest corporate partnerships. She systematically cold-called the executive directors of both companies. She introduced herself as my family member and warned them that I was currently under federal investigation for embezzling $150,000 from elderly family members to artificially inflate my company's revenue. By Friday afternoon, both clients pulled out. They didn't care if it was a family dispute or proven fact. Corporate entities despise liability and scandal. In less than 5 days, Sarah's lie had cost me my family, my reputation, my dignity, and $400,000 in lost corporate revenue. I was sitting on the floor of my empty apartment, staring at the ceiling, entirely broken. I had hit absolute rock bottom. But as the weekend passed, the crushing depression slowly morphed into something else. The sadness burned away, leaving behind a cold, calculating, and terrifying rage. I wasn't going to roll over and die. I was going to find out exactly where that money went, and I was going to burn Sarah's world to ashes. They say the best revenge is living well, but whoever coined that phrase never had their own flesh and blood try to send them to a federal penitentiary to cover up a six-figure crime. By the end of that first week, the crushing, paralyzing depression that had pinned me to my mattress began to evaporate. In its place, a cold, calculating, and razor-sharp anger took root. I had spent my entire life playing by the rules, building my company brick by brick, only to have it bulldozed by a spoiled 24-year-old playing the victim. I wasn't going to just sit there and wait for the police to knock on my door. I was going to fight back. My first move was calling an old college roommate, Marcus, who now worked as a forensic accountant for a massive auditing firm. We met at a dimly lit diner on the edge of town, far away from anyone who might recognize me. I slid into the booth, exhausted, and laid out the entire nightmare. Marcus listened quietly, stirring his black coffee. When I finished, he gave me a grim look. "Legally, your hands are tied behind your back," Marcus explained, leaning forward. "You aren't a signatory on that joint account. You have absolutely zero legal right to request bank statements, IP logs, or transfer histories. The bank won't even confirm the account exists if you call them. Unless your dad files a formal police report and the cops subpoena the records, you're locked out. And by the time the police do that, she might have enough time to doctor the evidence or fully frame you." "So what do I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "She covered her tracks perfectly." Marcus shook his head. "Nobody covers their tracks perfectly, especially not an amateur panicking under pressure. People are sloppy. They reuse passwords, they leave devices logged in, they use the same Wi-Fi networks. You don't need the bank right now. You need a digital footprint. Think. Has she ever used your Wi-Fi? Borrowed a laptop? Left an old phone behind?" I drove home that night with my brain running in overdrive. I tore my apartment apart, emptying closets and rummaging through storage bins. Did she leave anything? And then, at the bottom of a dusty cardboard box filled with tangled cables and old electronics, I saw it. An old, fourth-generation iPad with a spiderweb crack across the bezel. My heart skipped a beat. About 8 months ago, Sarah had spilled a latte over her MacBook. While she waited for my parents to buy her a new one, she had begged to borrow this old iPad to manage her boutique's Pinterest boards. She kept it for 3 months before returning it. Sarah was notoriously terrible with technology. She never cleared her cache, never used two-factor authentication, and most importantly, she rarely remembered to log out. My hands were literally shaking as I plugged the ancient charging cable into the wall. A red battery icon flashed on the screen. The next 20 minutes felt like 20 years. Finally, the Apple logo appeared. The screen lit up. There was no passcode. I swiped right and immediately clicked on the Mail app. It hadn't synced in months, but the account was still actively logged in. It wasn't her primary iCloud, it was a secondary Gmail account she used for junk and online shopping. I held my breath, connected the iPad to my Wi-Fi network, and pulled down on the screen to refresh the inbox. Downloading 4,208 new messages. The screen populated, and what I saw made my blood run freezing cold. There was absolutely no fashion boutique. There were 0 emails about wholesale inventory, 0 messages from fabric suppliers, and 0 LLC registration documents. Instead, the inbox was a horrifying mosaic of financial ruin. The screen was flooded with receipts. Hundreds of them. Deposit confirmed, stake. Com. Withdrawal failed, Bovada. Urgent action required, DraftKings margin call. Sarah wasn't an aspiring entrepreneur. She was a cripplingly addicted, high-stakes gambler. I scrolled frantically, taking screenshots and forwarding every single email to my own secure server. She was blowing $5,000, sometimes $10,000 a night on offshore crypto casinos and shady sports betting algorithms. But it got worse. As I dug into the archived folders, I found a string of frantic email exchanges and Cash App receipts linked to a guy named Trent. I remembered Trent. He was a sketchy, unemployed club promoter Sarah had briefly dated last year before my parents forced her to break it off. Or so they thought. I opened the emails. Trent was blackmailing her. He had compromising photos and videos of her from their time together, and he was threatening to send them directly to our father's conservative country club friends if she didn't pay him hush money every month. I sat back on the floor, the glow of the iPad illuminating the dark room. It all made sickening sense now. The $150,000 wasn't stolen in one massive heist. She had been systematically bleeding the account dry over 2 months to feed her gambling addiction and pay off her extortionist boyfriend. Then, the timeline caught up with her. Dad had mentioned wanting to see the boutique's financial projections for the quarter. She panicked. The money was gone. She needed a scapegoat, and she needed one fast. I was the perfect target, the estranged brother with the tech startup who knew how to hide money. I had the motive. I had the digital paper trail. I had the crypto wallet addresses. But Marcus's warning echoed in my head, you need physical proof. If I just showed them the iPad, she would claim I hacked her or fabricated the emails. I needed undeniable, visual proof of her taking the physical cash that the bank manager had reported missing. I cross-referenced the dates of the largest gambling deposits with the dates the bank manager claimed the cash was withdrawn. They matched perfectly. I called a ruthless corporate litigation lawyer I had met through my startup. I explained that my family was threatening me with a $150,000 civil suit for theft. Using their legal threat as our justification, my lawyer was able to file a preemptive discovery subpoena for the security camera footage at the specific ATM branch during the exact timestamps I had found in her emails. 10 days later, my lawyer called me into his office. He turned his monitor around. The security footage was crystal clear, timestamped at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. There was Sarah, standing in front of the ATM, her face illuminated by the screen. Standing right behind her, looking nervous and checking his surroundings, was Trent. She was pulling out massive, thick stacks of $100 bills, my father's retirement, and handing them directly to him. Caught in glorious 4K resolution. I didn't just have a smoking gun. I had a tactical nuke. And I knew exactly when and where I was going to drop it. I could have simply emailed the evidence to my father. I could have mailed a flash drive to the house or had my lawyer serve them with papers on a random Tuesday. But after the sheer magnitude of the hell they had put me through, after the physical assault, the complete excommunication, and the coordinated sabotage of my life's work, a simple email wasn't going to cut it. I didn't just want to clear my name, I wanted them to feel the exact, suffocating weight of the humiliation they had forced onto me. I bided my time. I waited 3 agonizing weeks in total silence. During that time, my legal team was busy drafting a massive civil lawsuit for defamation and tortious interference, specifically targeting Sarah and my Aunt Susan, the one who had maliciously called my clients and cost me $400,000 in contracts. I also officially handed over the iPad data and ATM footage to the local police department, filing formal charges for criminal fraud and filing a false police report. The trap was perfectly set. All I needed was an audience. Thanksgiving has always been the crown jewel of my family's holidays. Every year, without fail, the entire extended family, over 25 people, gathers at my grandparents' sprawling estate in the suburbs. It's an event defined by forced smiles, expensive wine, and bragging about achievements. Obviously, I had been strictly uninvited. But I knew the security code to the front gate, and I knew exactly what time the turkey was served. At 4:30 p.m. on Thursday, I pulled my car into the driveway. The crisp November air stung my face as I walked up the stone pathway. I was carrying a heavy canvas tote bag containing 15 thick, glossy black folders. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak front door open and walked straight down the hallway toward the massive formal dining room. The sounds of clinking crystal glasses, warm laughter, and overlapping conversation spilled out of the room. It smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and expensive Pinot Noir. The picture of perfect domestic bliss. I stepped into the archway. It took a few seconds for someone to notice me, but when my Aunt Susan finally looked up, she dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. Within 5 seconds, the entire room went completely, dead silent. The laughter evaporated. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. My father, who was standing at the head of the table holding an electric carving knife, went rigid. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "You have incredible nerve showing your face here. Get out of this house before I call the police." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I was completely devoid of emotion. I walked slowly to the absolute center of the massive mahogany table, right past my freezing mother and terrified sister, and unzipped my tote bag. "I highly suggest you put the phone down, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. I pulled out the 15 black folders and dropped them onto the table. The heavy thud made several people flinch. Because the police are already on their way. But they aren't coming for me. I slid a folder across the table toward my father, then handed one to Uncle Richard, and tossed one in front of Aunt Susan. "Open them," I commanded. It wasn't a request. Uncle Richard, the man who had threatened to see me rot in federal prison, aggressively flipped open his folder. "What is this garbage?" he started to say, but the words died in his throat. Page 1 of the dossier was an 8x10, high-resolution, time-stamped photograph from the bank's ATM. It showed Sarah, clearly illuminated by the screen's glow, pulling out thick stacks of $100 bills. Standing right over her shoulder, looking panicked, was Trent, her extortionist boyfriend. My father looked down at his copy. The electric carving knife slipped from his hand and hit the floor. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Turn the page," I instructed, pacing slowly behind Sarah's chair. I could feel her shaking violently. Page 2 contained the itemized receipts from Stake.com, DraftKings, and offshore crypto wallets, perfectly matching the dates and exact amounts of the bank withdrawals. Over $100,000 lost to gambling algorithms. "Turn to page 3, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "Those are the text message transcripts from the old iPad Sarah forgot to log out of. Specifically, the texts between her and Trent." My mother, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the paper, read the highlighted text aloud, her voice breaking into a hysterical sob. "Don't worry about the money, Trent. I'll just tell Dad my brother stole it for his startup. They all hate him anyway, they'll believe me instantly." The room erupted into absolute chaos. Sarah let out a blood-curdling shriek. She lunged across the table, knocking over crystal wine glasses, desperately trying to grab the folders from her uncles. "It's fake. It's Photoshop. He's a hacker, he made all of this up to frame me." She screamed, her face streaked with black mascara. But nobody was looking at me anymore. They were looking at her with absolute, unmasked horror. I looked directly at Aunt Susan, who was practically hyperventilating. "Susan, You called my corporate clients. You told them I was under federal investigation. You cost me $400,000 in contracts. I pulled a separate, legally bound document from my bag and dropped it on her plate. You have just been formally served. My legal team is suing you for defamation and tortious interference. You're going to lose your house. Then, I turned my attention back to my father. He was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles stark white, staring at the photo of his precious golden child handing his life savings to a club promoter in the middle of the night. He looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes. The realization of what he had done, the son he had struck and discarded, was physically crushing him. I gave the original files to the district attorney this morning, I said quietly, looking down at Sarah, who was now sobbing on the floor in a pathetic heap. Warrants have already been issued for felony bank fraud, grand larceny, and filing a false police report. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I turned on my heel and walked out the front door, leaving the house consumed by screams, shattering glass, and the absolute destruction of my family's perfect facade. As I walked down the long, winding driveway of my grandparents' estate, the crisp November wind hitting my face felt entirely different than it had when I arrived. It felt like absolute freedom. I got into my car, started the engine, and turned the heater on. Before I even reached the end of the suburban subdivision, 2 police cruisers blew past me in the opposite direction, their sirens screaming and their red and blue lights painting the dark neighborhood. They were heading straight for the Thanksgiving dinner. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I just drove. I turned my phone off for the entire weekend. I needed silence to process the sheer adrenaline of what had just happened. When I finally powered my phone back on Monday morning, it nearly crashed from the sheer volume of notifications. I had 147 missed calls, 84 voicemails, and hundreds of frantic text messages. The family group chat, which I had been exiled from months ago, had completely imploded. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee and started listening to the voicemails. The first few were from my mother. They were completely incoherent, just minutes of heavy sobbing, hyperventilating, and repeating, "Please answer, please, we didn't know, we are so sorry, please come home." Then came the voicemail from my father. This was the man who had slapped me across the face, looked me dead in the eye, and called me a parasite. His voice was completely broken. It lacked all the booming authority it had possessed my entire life. "Son. It's Dad," he choked out, his voice trembling violently. "I don't even know what to say. I am so deeply sorry. We were blind. We were stupid. The police arrested Sarah on Thursday night. They took her right out of the dining room in handcuffs. They're charging her with grand larceny and bank fraud. Son, she's terrified. I know what she did to you is unforgivable, but please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Call the district attorney. Tell them you won't testify. Tell them to drop the charges. She won't survive federal prison. Please, we can fix this. I'll take out a second mortgage to pay you back for the lost contracts. Just please, don't let them take my little girl away." I listened to the entire 10-minute message without shedding a single tear. It was the most pathetic thing I had ever heard. Even in the face of absolute, undeniable proof that his little girl was a calculating criminal who had weaponized my family against me, his first instinct wasn't to comfort the son whose life had been destroyed. His first instinct was to ask me to jump back on the grenade to save her. I didn't call him back. I didn't call any of them back. I let my lawyers do the talking. The legal fallout was absolutely catastrophic, and it hit Aunt Susan first. Susan had always been a loud, wealthy, arrogant woman who thrived on family gossip. But corporate litigation doesn't care about family gossip. My lawyers hit her with a massive lawsuit for defamation per se and tortious interference with a business contract. Because she had deliberately called my clients and fed them a fabricated story about a federal investigation, she was directly liable for the $400,000 in lost revenue, plus punitive damages. Within a month, her arrogance completely vanished. She tried to call me crying, begging me to settle out of court, screaming that I was going to make her homeless. I instructed my lawyers to offer zero leniency. She was forced to liquidate her investment portfolios and ultimately had to sell her pristine, 4-bedroom house just to cover the settlement and her own exorbitant legal fees. She now lives in a tiny rented apartment 2 towns over, completely ostracized by the rest of the family because her big mouth cost them all a fortune. As for Sarah, reality hit her like a freight train. There is no golden child privilege in the federal justice system. She tried to play the victim in court, crying to the judge that she was young and manipulated. But the prosecutor pulled up the text messages where she explicitly bragged about framing me. That destroyed any chance of sympathy. To make matters worse for her, Trent, the extortionist boyfriend, was tracked down by the police trying to cross state lines. The moment they sat him in an interrogation room, he immediately rolled on her, accepting a plea deal and testifying that Sarah was the mastermind behind the false accusation. Sarah was forced to declare complete bankruptcy. She is currently awaiting sentencing, and her public defender has already warned my parents that she is looking at a minimum of 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary, with zero chance of early parole. My parents' marriage fractured under the pressure. My dad's retirement is completely gone, blown on offshore casinos. He is 70 years old and had to go back to work as a manager at a local hardware store just to pay Sarah's massive legal defense bills. 6 months after Thanksgiving, on the day I was scheduled to move out of the state, I decided to finally break my silence. I opened the massive family group chat. I typed out one final, definitive message to the people who shared my blood. For 29 years, I let you treat me like a second-class citizen. When the ultimate test came, you didn't even hesitate to throw me to the wolves. You didn't ask for my side. You didn't look at the evidence. You chose to believe a lie because it was easier than holding your golden child accountable. You are all reaping exactly what you sowed. I am changing my number today. I am moving across the country. Consider me dead. Do not try to find me, and do not ever contact me again. I hit send. Then, I permanently deleted the contact cards, pulled the SIM card out of my phone, snapped it in half, and threw it in the trash. I relocated my startup to a thriving tech hub in Texas. Without the suffocating weight of my toxic family dragging me down, my business absolutely exploded. I signed 3 new contracts within my first month there, easily recouping the money Aunt Susan had cost me. I bought a beautiful house, adopted a dog, and started going to therapy to unlearn the decades of emotional abuse I had endured. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what they are doing. I picture my father working a retail shift he shouldn't have to work, and my sister sitting in a freezing cell, realizing that her tears don't work on prison guards. But I never feel guilty. They made their bed, lit it on fire, and now, they get to sleep in the ashes.